I did not know after the Cuban Revolutionary War, which was the guerrilla war that brought Fidel Castro to power, Cuba had a much bigger civil war between all the people who fought against Batista, who are now fighting against Fidel. And a lot of people have no idea that this war ever happened. It was called the Escambray Rebellion. Let me give you just an idea of the scope. The guerrilla war that brought Fidel Castro to power was about 2.5 years long. Not even that long. It was like 2 years and 3 months. And soldiers and police that Batista was able to deploy against the guerrillas at any one time was 30,000 people. 30,000. So 2 years and 30,000 people fighting the guerrilleros. And Fidel never had more than 200 or 300 guys because there were other guerrillas. So Fidel was not even the only person fighting in that war. There were 5 or 6 other guerrillas, plus urban militias, plus student organizations that were doing suicide missions just to try and kill some government soldiers. Like, it was insane. And the history has been rewritten to give Fidel Castro and the communists credit for the Cuban Revolutionary War. No, he was just the best at public relations. Anyway, after Fidel Castro comes to power, 1 year after the rebel army comes rolling into Havana in 1959, 1 year later, a lot of his own veterans decide, forget this. This authoritarian regime is not what we are fighting for. We did not fight for them to be executing people around the clock. We did not fight for all these newspapers to be getting shut down. This is not the free Cuba that we were fighting for. So the guerrillas went back to the bush. Now, I told you guys, 2 years, 30,000 people. And Fidel never had more than a couple of hundred guys. There were about 2,000 guerrillas fighting against Fidel. So 10 times as many people as he recruited were fighting against his regime. And the Escambray Rebellion, this massive civil war, lasted for 6 years. 6 years. And in order to surround the guerrillas,
people don't know that in Brazil that Cuba had a civil war for 6 years after the revolution. People trying to impede Fidel Castro of becoming a dictator, but they failed.
And most of the people fighting, there were some Batistianos fighting against him. However, by that time, most Batistianos fled from the country because a couple of months later, so like April or May of 1959, sometime in the spring or the summer, the Batistianos tried a coup. They tried one last hurrah to get it together, and they failed. So all the last Batistianos in Cuba, they fled. The ones that did not get arrested and executed, they fled in 1959.
To U.S. probably,
Yes. So there were some Batistianos that fought against Fidel in the Civil War, but most of the people fighting against him were people from his own side from the last war. And in order to crush the guerrillas, the communist regime created a national revolutionary militia because they had no army. They dissolved the old government army. And there was only a couple of thousand people in the new revolutionary army. So they created a national militia, and they just drafted people. They conscripted something like 300,000 people. 300,000
forcibly,
campesinos.
Forcibly.
Yeah, I mean, the people with a gun showed up. It was a piece of paper and a gun. Congratulations, you're in the National Revolutionary Militia. You get to fight to protect the revolution. Now, come on, let's go. There's no choice. So by this time, the Soviet Union's military advisors had arrived in Cuba. And about 400 advisors were leading these troops strategically. So in all the different areas where there were guerrillas fighting, basically the Soviets, they did like the rural version of capturing Berlin. They would encircle an objective and just start sending human waves.
Yeah, attrition warfare.
The guerrillas would fight to the death. Yeah. So if there's a group with like 20 guerrilleros and they're hidden, they had the advantage, which is why the regime's casualties were so much more severe than the rebels, because these dudes had barely any military training, and literally it was like World War II, just long lines of people, walking forward with a gun, and it was the guerrillas just taking pot shots until they ran out of ammo or until they themselves got shot. And the regime didn't care about how many people it lost, because just like
they're all slaves, right? They're all slaves.
Yeah, if somebody
communism.
falls,
yeah,
the next guy goes forward and picks up his gun. So
Soviet style, yeah.
Annihilated this rebellion. Yeah, so there was this massive civil war that most people don't even know about. And this was one of the things that I learned. One of the other things that I learned while researching the Castro regime and how to oppose them through politics on the island, I figured out, or I learned, excuse me, I did not figure out, I came to learn from information already available that the Cuban armed forces invaded Venezuela and Nicaragua. And the main reasons why those communist regimes are still in power today in Venezuela and Nicaragua is because there are tens of thousands of Cuban soldiers in those countries, but they're dressed in the uniform of those countries. They're not wearing Cuban uniforms.